A young woman flees an arranged marriage, with nothing but her horse and the clothes on her back, heading towards an uncertain future in the wild, untamed West. The open plains stretch out before her, a vast emptiness, both a promise of freedom and a reminder of what she's left behind. Margaret seeks freedom, but the West is no sanctuary. It's a place where survival is a daily struggle, and the past doesn't easily fade. Will she find the peace she's searching for, or will the ghosts of her past continue to haunt her at every turn? Can a woman truly be free in a world ruled by men and unforgiving lands? Margaret's life had been scripted long before she could write her own story. Born into a wealthy family, her future was mapped out in meticulous detail, dictated by duty, tradition, and the desires of others. A marriage was arranged for her before she could even imagine a life beyond the walls of her family's estate. The groom, a man she barely knew, was as much a stranger to her heart as the life she was expected to lead. Every expectation pressed down on her like the heavy weight of a life she didn't want. She had been a dutiful daughter, complying with the rules, attending the social gatherings, and preparing for the day she would become a wife in name only. But inside, Margaret was restless. Her spirit longed for something more, something far beyond the suffocating world her family had crafted for her. She dreamt of open skies, of freedom, of life unbound by obligation. And then, the night before her wedding day, everything changed. Margaret stood at the threshold of a life she could not bear to enter. As she dressed for the ceremony, her mind wandered, imagining the endless days that would stretch before her, her voice never heard, her choices never her own. The weight of her wedding gown, beautiful as it was, felt like a shackle. Her heart raced, not with the excitement of a bride, but with the fear of a life she could never live. As she stood in the quiet of her room, looking out at the horizon, a thought seized her, a desperate, wild thought that whispered of escape. She could not marry him. She could not marry anyone. Not like this. With the rising sun casting its golden glow across the land, Margaret made a decision that would alter the course of her life forever. With one swift motion, she tore herself from the life that had been thrust upon her. She didn't pause to consider the consequences or the shame. There was only the call of freedom, the echo of a life yet to be lived. She mounted her horse, rode through the gates of her family's estate, and vanished into the unknown. The wilderness offered no promises of comfort, but it was her only chance at survival, at a life that was hers to command. She didn't know what awaited her, but she couldn't stay in a world that had no room for her dreams. The frontier was wild, untamed, and it was exactly where she needed to be. The frontier town Margaret eventually found herself in was like nothing she had ever imagined. It was a world defined by dust and grit, where survival was a daily battle, and every man had his own idea of what freedom meant. The streets were raw and untamed, a far cry from the polished ballrooms and finely furnished parlors she'd left behind. Here, the law of the land was survival, and the law of men was just as uncertain. The town was a patchwork of wooden buildings, each weathered by the harsh elements and the years of hard living. The smell of sweat and leather hung in the air, mixing with the scent of horses and the dry dust that clung to everything. There were no grand estates here, no endless rows of servants, just men and women, struggling to carve out a life in a world that demanded hard work, persistence, and a willingness to fight for what you wanted. Margaret didn't know how she had ended up here, but as she took in the sight of the saloons, the dusty roads, and the rugged faces of the men who walked through them, she understood that this place was not for the faint-hearted. Every person here was running from something, chasing something, or simply trying to hold on. The promises of freedom she'd imagined had taken on a new meaning in the stark light of the frontier. It wasn't the kind of freedom where dreams came easily. It was the kind of freedom that demanded blood, sweat, and sacrifice. Her arrival didn't go unnoticed. In a town like this, everyone was a stranger until they proved themselves. Margaret had no place here, no name, and no real plan beyond survival. She was just another soul caught in the web of the frontier's harsh reality. Yet, as the days passed, she began to realize that this town, this land, would shape her in ways she had never anticipated. It wasn't long before Margaret's past caught up with her, despite the miles she had ridden to escape it. A bounty hunter had been sent to find her, a hired gun who made a living tracking down those who tried to run from their obligations. He had heard rumors of a runaway bride in the area and was determined to claim the reward that would come with returning Margaret to her family. Margaret didn't know it, but the bounty hunter was already hot on her trail. She had found work in the town, doing odd jobs at a local ranch, trying to keep her head down and stay unnoticed. But the bounty hunter had been asking questions, piecing together the story of the woman who had disappeared on the eve of her wedding. He was getting closer, and Margaret could feel it. One evening, as she made her way back to the small cabin she rented on the outskirts of town, she saw him, a figure in the distance, his silhouette framed by the setting sun. At first, she thought it was just another stranger, but the closer he got, the more she realized he was searching for someone. Searching for her. Panic set in. She couldn't be caught. Not now, not when she had finally tasted freedom. Her heart raced as she looked for a way out. There was no time to think, no time to plan. She ran, her feet pounding against the hard earth, but the bounty hunter was quick. He had her cornered near the edge of town, and she knew there was no escape. Just as she thought all hope was lost, a shot rang out. The bounty hunter fell to the ground, a cry escaping his lips as he crumpled to the earth. Margaret spun around, her heart still pounding, to see a man, tall, lean, and dressed in the worn clothes of a cowboy, standing across the street, his gun still smoking in the air. "Run!" he shouted, his voice urgent. "I'll hold him off." Without thinking, Margaret took the only chance she had left. She turned and ran, her legs moving faster than they ever had, her mind focused only on getting away. Behind her, she heard the cowboy's voice again, calling for her to keep going, telling her not to look back. But she couldn't help herself, she did. The bounty hunter, still alive but injured, reached for his gun, but the cowboy was already there, shooting again, the bounty hunter falling unconscious. With one last glance at the cowboy, Margaret made a desperate dash to the woods that bordered the town. She had no idea who this man was, why he had helped her, or what awaited her next. But for the first time in days, she felt a flicker of hope. Her heart, racing with fear and adrenaline, knew that she owed this stranger her life. But in the West, even favors came at a cost. Margaret's early days in the frontier were filled with uncertainty. At first, she had believed the rugged, harsh land would offer her the freedom she longed for, a place where she could be herself, away from the confines of her family's expectations. But as the days bled into weeks, she realized that the West was no sanctuary. It was a place that demanded survival above all else. The hard land was unforgiving, and every moment was a test of strength, endurance, and resilience. She had no skills for this life. She was born into wealth, raised in luxury, accustomed to the comforts of a life that made decisions for her. Her hands, once soft and unblemished, were now rough and callous from the work that came with living in the wild. At first, she struggled with even the simplest tasks, tending to a fire, cooking over a camp stove, learning how to ride a horse without falling off. The weight of each day, each new lesson, felt heavier than the last. Jesse, the cowboy who had saved her life, had taken it upon himself to teach her the ways of the land. He was patient, yet firm, never once making her feel like her lack of experience was an obstacle. Margaret learned to ride in the early mornings, when the air was cool and the world seemed at its quietest. At first, her legs would tremble as she mounted the horse, and her heart would race with fear as the animal jolted forward. But Jesse was always there, his presence steady and reassuring, guiding her through the motions, showing her how to control the reins, how to read the signs of the land, how to trust herself. As days turned into weeks, she became more capable. She learned to gather wood, to build a fire that could withstand the biting cold of the night, to cook meals over the open flame with nothing but the most basic of tools. At first, she had relied on Jesse for everything. But now, there were moments when she could do things on her own, moments when she realized just how far she had come from the sheltered woman who had once lived under the weight of her family's expectations. But even as she gained new skills and began to feel more like a part of the frontier, Margaret couldn't escape the deep ache inside of her. The freedom she thought she had found here came with a price. No safety net, no protection, no guarantees. In the town, she had started working at a local ranch, a place where men like Jesse worked tirelessly for their wages. It was hard, back-breaking work, and every day was a reminder that she wasn't in control. Still, there was something about the rawness of it all that began to speak to her. There was no pretending here. The land stripped away all pretensions, and in its place, Margaret began to see herself as she was unfiltered, vulnerable, and strong in ways she had never known. But the past, that heavy burden she had tried to outrun, remained ever present. The life she had left behind wasn't just a memory. It was a shadow that followed her through every step she took. Sometimes, in quiet moments, when she was alone, her mind would wander back to her family, to her old life, and the questions would start again. Had she made the right choice? Was this the life she was meant to lead? Or was it just a desperate escape from a fate she could no longer control? As time passed, Margaret's feelings for Jesse began to deepen. He had become more than just a rescuer. He was a constant presence in her life, the man who had shown her the ropes, the one who helped her find her place in this brutal world. In many ways, he had become a lifeline in the sea of uncertainty she found herself in. Yet, despite the bond they had formed, Margaret couldn't shake the feeling that she was playing with fire. Jesse was not a man she could easily trust. She had learned that much. He was kind, yes, but he carried with him a guardedness, a secrecy that made it impossible to know what he truly thought, what he truly wanted. There were moments when his touch would linger a little longer than necessary, when his eyes would soften as they met hers. But then there would be a distance in him, something cold and distant, as if he was just as afraid to get too close as she was. She found herself caught between two worlds. One was the past she had fled, the safety of a life dictated by others, but one that offered no room for her to breathe, to grow, to be truly herself. The other was the rough, uncertain life of the frontier, a place where survival was the only thing that mattered, where freedom came with no promises. And in the midst of that, Jesse stood, a man who seemed to embody both sides of the coin. He was a symbol of the life she had left behind, a life she couldn't entirely escape. And yet, he was also a part of this new world she was trying to navigate. Margaret found herself questioning what it meant to truly be free. Was freedom about running from everything that bound you? Or was it about learning to accept the things you couldn't change? Was it possible to be free in the West, where freedom meant survival, where men and women carved out their lives in a brutal, unyielding world? As she sat alone one evening, her reflection staring back at her from the cracked mirror of the cabin, she could feel the weight of her choices pressing down on her. Could she truly start over in this new world? Or was she doomed to keep running, haunted by the specter of a life she could never fully leave behind? The cracks in the mirror seemed to mock her, each one a reminder of the brokenness inside of her, the fractures in her own identity that she had never taken the time to examine before. For the first time since she had fled, Margaret questioned whether she could ever truly trust herself. Could she stay here, in the West, with all its dangers and uncertainties? Could she love Jesse, a man whose past was as elusive as her own, and build a future together, even if it meant tying herself to something she didn't fully understand? Or was the pain of her past too great, the fear of losing herself in another person too strong? Margaret's heart was a battlefield. She had spent her whole life running from the expectations of others, from a future that wasn't hers to decide. The West had given her the chance to be free, to live without the constraints of society, of family, of a life she didn't want. But now, as she stood on the edge of this new life, she felt the pull of a different kind of pressure, the pressure to stay, to commit, to build something with Jesse that could root her here in this harsh land. Her internal conflict ran deeper than her desire for love. It was about control, about ownership of her life. Could she allow herself to be vulnerable again, to open her heart to someone after everything she had been through? Could she trust Jesse, or was she simply longing for the security she had lost? There were nights when she lay awake, holding the locket from her old life in her hand, tracing its edges with trembling fingers. It was all she had left of the world she had walked away from, a symbol of the promises made to her, a reminder of the life she had lost. As much as she wanted to let go of the past, to leave it behind and build something new, she couldn't rid herself of the fear that love, no matter how pure, would always be a chain. The more time she spent with Jesse, the more her feelings for him deepened. She had seen his tenderness, his strength, his capacity to protect and care. But could love in the frontier be enough? Could it truly provide the security she so desperately needed? Or would it be another weight to carry, another anchor that would hold her down? As she wrestled with these questions, Margaret realized that the decision wasn't just about Jesse. It was about her, about whether she was willing to trust herself enough to face the unknown, to believe that she could create a life for herself, free of the constraints of her past and free of the fear that love would only hold her captive. The West had already proven itself a harsh teacher to Margaret, a place where nothing was given freely and every day was a battle. Yet, amidst the grit and sweat of survival, she had found something she hadn't expected: connection. Jesse had become more than just a companion or a guide. He was a presence in her life, the steady force that anchored her when the winds of doubt and fear threatened to tear her apart. But as much as she had come to trust him, there was still a distance between them, a wall Jesse had built around himself, one that she could never quite get past. Jesse had always been a man of few words, his emotions carefully guarded, his past never fully explained. There were times when Margaret would catch him looking out into the distance, a faraway look in his eyes, as if there was something in the past that still haunted him. But she never pressed him for answers. After all, everyone in the frontier had something they were running from. Wasn't that the price of freedom? But as Margaret had learned time and time again, the past had a way of catching up with you, no matter how far you ran or how hard you tried to escape. One night, after a long day of work, Margaret and Jesse sat by the fire. The air was cool, the crackle of the flames the only sound that filled the silence between them. Margaret felt a strange tension in the air, a heaviness that she couldn't ignore. It was as if something was about to break, something Jesse had been holding back for too long. It was Jesse who spoke first, his voice low and steady, but laced with something Margaret had never heard from him before: regret. "Margaret, there's something you should know," he said, his eyes flickering to the fire, not meeting hers. "Something about me." Margaret's heart skipped. She had heard the rumors in town. There were whispers about Jesse's past, about who he really was. But she had never asked, never pushed for answers. Maybe she had known, on some level, that it was only a matter of time before the truth came to light. "I'm not just a cowboy," Jesse continued, his voice breaking slightly, as if the words weighed more than he cared to admit. "I'm the son of a ranch owner, a wealthy one. My family, they had everything planned out for me. They had their future for me all figured out. But I didn't want that. I didn't want the life they tried to make me live." Margaret's pulse quickened. She had never asked Jesse where he came from, never pushed him to explain why he had left everything behind. But now, as his confession hung in the air, the pieces of the puzzle began to fall into place. "I ran," Jesse continued, his face tight with the strain of revealing his past. "I left everything behind: my name, my family, the ranch. I couldn't stand it. The expectations, the pressure. It was suffocating. I came to the West to escape, to find freedom. But I never left the guilt behind, the shame. I thought I could outrun it all. But the truth is, I've been running from the same thing you are, Margaret. From a life they wanted me to live. From a man they wanted me to be." Margaret's breath caught in her throat. She had thought she was the only one who had run from something. She had thought her escape was unique, her struggle one that only she understood. But now, As she looked at Jesse, she saw that he, too, had been bound by chains. Chains of expectation, chains of family, chains of the very same society she had tried to leave behind. In that moment, everything she thought she knew about him shifted. Jesse wasn't just the cowboy who had saved her life. He was a man running from his own demons, from the same pressures that had shaped her life. The realization hit her like a wave, the weight of it sinking deep in her chest. She had thought that by leaving her past behind, she could start over. But now, she understood that the past never truly let go. It followed you. It haunted you. It shaped you, whether you wanted it to or not. The truth about Jesse's past forced Margaret to confront her own fears. She had believed that escaping her old life would set her free, that the West was a place where she could redefine herself, carve out a new identity, and leave behind the shackles of her family's expectations. But in the harsh, unforgiving land of the frontier, she came to realize that true freedom wasn't about running. It was about facing the truth of who you were, of accepting your past, and choosing to move forward in spite of it. Margaret stared at Jesse, her mind racing. She had fallen for him, yes, but could she continue to love someone whose past was so intertwined with the very thing she had fled from? He wasn't just a stranger to her past. He was a reflection of it. He had come from a world of privilege, of wealth, just like her. He had been groomed for a life that didn't belong to him, just as she had been. And now, here they were, two souls caught in the same struggle, trying to find freedom in a world that demanded so much. But could she trust him? Could she trust herself? The pain of her past, the weight of the decisions she had made, seemed to echo in the silence between them. As much as she had longed for freedom, as much as she had hoped that love could save her, she now realized that love wasn't enough to erase the scars of the past. Jesse's confession had shattered the illusion she had built around him. He wasn't the answer to her freedom. He was a reminder of what she had left behind. Margaret knew that the decision before her wasn't just about Jesse. It was about her. Could she embrace love again, knowing that it could never be free of the past? Could she build a future with him? Or would she always be running from something, afraid that love would only bind her to a life she couldn't escape? The realization that Jesse's past was so similar to hers forced Margaret to confront a question she had avoided for so long. Was it possible to truly be free, or had she only traded one set of chains for another? Her heart ached as she thought of the life she had left behind, of the family she had abandoned, of the future that had been planned for her. She had believed that running was the answer. But now, as she sat by the fire with Jesse, she wondered if the real question wasn't about escape at all. Maybe it was about whether she could face the truth of who she was, of who Jesse was, and still choose to love him. Could she really let go of her past and allow herself to be vulnerable again? Or would she leave Jesse behind, unwilling to risk the freedom she had fought so hard to claim? That night, as the moon rose high over the desert and the fire flickered low, Margaret found herself riding away at dawn. The wind in her hair, the vast horizon stretching before her. Everything felt like it was both new and familiar at once. The open road had always promised freedom, but as she rode away from Jesse, she was uncertain. She didn't know if she was running towards something or away from something. Could she ever truly stop running? The answer, Margaret knew, was something she would have to find on her own, on the open road, in the silence of the wilderness, in the depths of her own heart. Margaret had always believed that freedom was something you ran towards, something you seized by escaping the things that tied you down. But now, as she stood on the edge of the town, watching the horizon fade into the dust, she realized that there was another kind of freedom, one that wasn't about running, but about standing firm. And yet, she was still uncertain, still torn between the life she had left behind and the new world she had come to embrace. That was when the storm came. A dangerous gang rolled into town, their faces hard and weathered, their intentions clear. They were a group of outlaws, known for terrorizing smaller towns, robbing, looting, and leaving nothing but fear in their wake. The town had always been on edge, but now, with the gang's arrival, it seemed like it was only a matter of time before the violence began. Margaret felt the tension in the air, the murmurs of fear passing through the streets as the gang made their way into town. They were notorious for their ruthlessness, and there was no guarantee that anyone would be spared. This wasn't just a fight for survival anymore. It was a fight for everything Margaret had come to care about, the people she had learned to trust, the place she had started to call home. Jesse had been preparing for something like this. He knew that the West was dangerous, that the frontier was a place where only the strongest could survive. But Margaret hadn't been ready. She had always believed that running was the answer, that avoiding conflict would bring her peace. But now, standing in the face of a danger that threatened everything she had come to love, she knew she couldn't run any longer. Not from a gang, not from herself. As the gang began to make their demands, threatening the townspeople and intimidating those who dared to stand up to them, Margaret saw the desperation in the eyes of the people she had come to care for. And she realized that this was it, the moment where everything she had been running from, everything she had been avoiding, would come to a head. Jesse was already preparing for the worst. He had his rifle in hand, his face set in determination. There was no more running for him, either. He had chosen this life, this place, these people. He had made a promise to himself to never look back at the family he had left behind. And now, that promise was being tested. The gunfight erupted without warning. The gang, having no regard for the lives of the townspeople, started firing in all directions, their bullets hitting the wooden buildings, splintering walls and windows. The sound of gunfire filled the air, drowning out the shouts of the terrified people as they scrambled for cover. Margaret's heart raced, her body frozen for a moment by the sheer chaos unfolding before her. But then, as the first bullet whizzed past her, something inside her snapped. She wasn't going to hide. She wasn't going to let fear control her anymore. This was her fight now. This was her town, her life, and her chance to prove that she wasn't just running from her past, but standing tall for the future she wanted to build. She grabbed her rifle from behind the counter of the saloon where she had been hiding, her hands shaking but steady. The weight of it felt foreign at first, but as she leveled it and took aim, something inside her clicked. This wasn't about running anymore. This was about standing up. Jesse was already in the thick of it, moving with purpose, his gunfire precise and calculated. He wasn't just protecting the town. He was protecting her. Margaret could see the fierce determination in his eyes, the resolve that had always been there, buried beneath layers of secrets and fears. This was the man he had been all along, the one who had made the difficult choice to stand, to fight for what he believed in. And now, Margaret was standing with him. The battle raged on, the sound of gunfire and shouting mingling in the air. But Margaret didn't falter. She fired her rifle, taking down one of the gang members with a steady hand. She didn't know where the strength was coming from, whether it was the adrenaline of the moment or the years of pin-up frustration finally finding an outlet. But it didn't matter. She was here. She was part of this fight, and she wasn't backing down. As the smoke from the gunfight began to clear, the town square was littered with the fallen. The gang, realizing they were no match for the combined resistance of the townspeople and Jesse's determination, began to retreat, cursing as they withdrew. But Margaret's heart didn't slow. Her hands were still trembling from the battle, her chest tight from the realization that she had just fought for her survival, for the town, and for everything she had come to care about. The dust settled. The chaos of the gunfight had left its mark on the town, on the people, on Margaret herself. But as the sounds of the battle faded into the distance, Margaret stood tall, her heart racing, her mind still processing the events that had unfolded. She had fought. She had stood her ground when everything inside her had screamed to run. In that moment, Margaret understood what true freedom was. It wasn't the absence of struggle, nor the flight from pain. It wasn't found in a place far from home, or in a life untouched by conflict. True freedom, she realized, was about choosing to fight for something. It was about standing up, even when the odds were stacked against you. As Margaret looked around the town square, she saw the faces of the people who had come together to defend what was theirs. They weren't just survivors, they were fighters. They were the ones who understood that freedom came with a price. And that price wasn't always easy to pay, but it was worth it. Margaret turned to Jesse, her eyes meeting his across the battlefield. He was covered in dust, his face drawn with the exhaustion of the fight, but there was something different in his gaze. Something softer, something that spoke of a bond forged in the heat of battle, a trust built on shared struggles. The town was safe. The danger had passed. But for Margaret, the real battle had only just begun. She had faced her fears, had chosen to stand rather than run. And now, she knew that no matter what came next, she was ready. Margaret walked toward Jesse, her breath still heavy, her body sore from the fight, but her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. She had found something in herself that she never knew existed. She had found the strength to fight, the courage to face her fears, and the peace that came from knowing she wasn't running anymore. As she stood beside Jesse, the world seemed to slow. The chaos, the confusion, the uncertainty, it all seemed to fade away. Margaret knew now that she wasn't just surviving. She was living. And for the first time since she had ridden into the West, she truly felt free. The battle was over. But the journey, her journey, was just beginning. And Margaret was no longer afraid to see where it would take her. The dust of the battle had long since settled, and the town, once filled with the tension of an impending siege, was quiet. The streets, littered with the remnants of the conflict, had begun to return to their usual routine. The townspeople, who had once been paralyzed with fear, were now cautiously moving about, cleaning up and tending to their wounds, both physical and emotional. It was a town that had been tested, and it had emerged stronger for it. But even amidst the calm, there lingered a weight in the air, the awareness that life in the West was never truly free from danger. For Margaret and Jesse, the storm that had threatened to tear everything apart had passed, but the storm of their lives was far from over. The quiet was an illusion. The West was unforgiving, and the challenges they had just faced were only the beginning. Still, as they stood side by side, they both knew something had shifted. Something had changed. They were no longer just two people caught in the winds of their past. They had faced the tempest together, and in doing so, they had found a bond that was stronger than anything either of them had ever known. As the town slowly regained its normal rhythm, Margaret and Jesse shared a moment of peace. They stood at the edge of the town, the sun beginning its slow descent over the horizon. There was a quiet understanding between them, an acknowledgement of the love they had found in one another, born out of struggle, pain, and perseverance. For Margaret, it was a moment of reflection. She had come so far from the woman who had ridden into the West alone, frightened and unsure of herself. She had faced her fears, not by running, but by standing up for what she believed in. She had learned that true freedom wasn't just about escape, it was about choice. And now, as she stood beside Jesse, she realized that love wasn't something that would hold her captive. It was something that would set her free. Jesse, too, had come to terms with his past. The secrets that had haunted him, the weight of his own family's expectations, had been shed in the heat of battle and the vulnerability of their shared experience. The man he had once been, the man running from everything, was no longer who he was. He had chosen this life. He had chosen Margaret. And in doing so, he had found a new kind of peace. They didn't speak much. There was no need for words, not after everything they had been through. They understood each other without having to say it aloud. There was no perfect ending, no fairy tale conclusion. The West was still wild, the future uncertain. But there was a sense of quiet certainty between them now, a sense of belonging, of togetherness, forged in the crucible of their shared trials. Margaret and Jesse shared a final look, one that said everything they couldn't yet put into words. It was a look that spoke of trust, of love, and of a promise that, no matter what the future held, they would face it together. They didn't need to say the words. Love had already woven its bond between them, one that was stronger than any force they had encountered before. They mounted their horses side by side and began to ride. The town, once again peaceful, faded into the distance behind them. The open sky stretched before them, vast and endless, full of both promise and uncertainty. And in that moment, Margaret knew the journey was far from over. There would be more struggles, more pain, more tests of their resolve. But for the first time since she had arrived in the West, she was ready. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of the West, not of herself, and certainly not of the future. Together, they would face whatever came next. The horizon was endless, and the road ahead unknown. But with Jessie by her side, Margaret knew that she was no longer running. She was living. As the story of Margaret's journey comes to a close, we're left with more than just the echoes of her footsteps in the dust. Her struggle for freedom, her search for love, and the decisions she made along the way are questions we all face in one form or another. If you found yourself reflecting on Margaret's path, her courage, her doubts, and the choices that shaped her future, don't keep it to yourself. We want to hear from you. Do you believe love is the key to freedom? Or do you think true freedom comes from within, from accepting ourselves and the world around us? Let us know in the comments below. Your thoughts, your reflections, and your perspectives matter. And if you enjoyed this journey with Margaret, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with others. Let's continue to explore these timeless questions together. Because the story isn't just hers, it's ours too.